Welcome back to Living Outside the Matrix. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing the Paleo-Ketogenic approach to diet, all within the context of naturopathic medicine. And joining me for this conversation, it's a very great pleasure to welcome Dr. Sarah Myhill. Sarah, thank you for taking the time to join me today, and a warm welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nigel. Far away.
Fantastic. Maybe you can start us off, Sarah. You've written several books, I hasten to add. One of them, I think it was entitled Ecological Medicine. And I gather from your website that you have a naturopathic approach. Maybe you could just give us a brief overview of naturopathic and maybe how it's distinguished from integrative and functional medicine and various other terms that we might hear today in the alternative medicine community.
Okay. Well, basically, it's all the same thing. It's all about asking the question, why? Now, this is something that conventional doctors don't do. They have symptoms suppressing drugs, and off the patients go with more and more symptoms, more and more drugs, more and more side effects, and disaster. So integrative, functional, naturopathic, it doesn't matter what you call it. The basic approach is the same. We're asking the question, why? Why does somebody have headaches? Why do they have fatigue? Why do they have arthritis? Because if you know the why, then that has very logical implications for how to fix it. So if something is due to allergy to a food, and guess what? Irritable bowel syndrome and migraine are often food allergy issues, then you can eliminate the offending foods and that patient then recovers. Ditto arthritis. And my special interest, of course, is fatigue, which has many possible causes. But the only thing to know about naturopathic medicine is we want to know the mechanism. We want to know the why.
Fantastic. So obviously that's the thing that modern allopathic medicine doesn't do, does it? They sort of match a symptom to a prescription of drugs, or the drugs to the symptoms list, and they write you out a prescription and off you go. And of course, it doesn't address any problem. Okay, well that's very clear. So, how important within your naturopathic approach is diet in general? Because obviously we're coming on to talk about the paleo and the ketogenic. Maybe you could just sort of frame that in diet and nutrition in general, in terms of the fundamental principles of health, if you like.
Well, every treatment of every single patient in the world starts off with diet. And I think of the business of recovering from disease, or just living well so you can get to your full potential, is like building a house. And the foundation stones of building that house is the diet. And unless you are prepared to change your diet, then forget about the rest. So it is the starting point. So you then have to ask the question, which diet? And whenever I have a difficult question, should we do this, should we do that? Always go back to first principles. Always go back to evolutionary biology. What did primitive man, what did primitive woman consume? And for the last, a few hundred thousands of years. And the answer is they consumed a paleo-ketogenic diet. Now, that's just a rough outline of what it is. And of course, a paleo-ketogenic diet will be different in America, to India, to China, to the Inuit Indians. But fundamentally, we should be eating a paleo-ketogenic diet. Paleo, because two foods which have come into our diet very recently from an evolutionary perspective are the dairy products and the gluten grains. And we now know both those foods drive many pathologies. The second aspect of the diet is it needs to be low in carbohydrates. Now, that's not no carbohydrates, it's low in carbohydrates. And the key is you want to be in ketosis at least once a day. Now, I know I've jumped a million miles ahead at that point, but people say, well, can I have potatoes? Can I have rice? Can I have beans? And the answer is yes, you can, so long as you are not overwhelming the ability of your body to deal with those carbohydrates. Because if you do overwhelm the ability of the body to manage those, then there are two big problems that arise. The first is you start to lose control of your blood sugars. And if you start spiking your blood sugar, that drives hormonal reactions. As the blood sugar goes up, you spike adrenaline, and that drives high blood pressure and sleeplessness and insomnia and such. And as the blood sugar comes down again very rapidly, that spikes insulin, which lays sugars down. I beg your pardon, that spikes adrenaline. As the blood sugar goes up, that spikes insulin. Yep. We got it the wrong way around. And insulin is what lays down fat, so that makes you fat and overweight. And then as the blood sugar comes down, following that insulin spike, you then spike adrenaline. And it's adrenaline that drives high blood pressure, anxiety, insomnia, and such like. So that's the one. That's called metabolic syndrome. It's characterized by central obesity, high blood pressure, and often fatigue. And the corollary, the follow-up to metabolic syndrome is diabetes. And we know diabetes is, the major risk factor for heart disease, for cancer, and dementia, the three big killers. The second reason why we need to be low carb, so we don't overwhelm the ability of the gut to deal with that, is because too many carbohydrates and the upper gut, which should be a sterile digesting gut to digest meat and fat and protein, then it becomes a fermenting upper gut. And the fermenting upper gut causes so many problems, because guess what? If you ferment sugar in your upper gut, if you ferment it by yeast, you produce alcohol. This is called the auto-brewery syndrome, and the alcohol levels can be quite high. And guess what? That alone can give you a foggy brain. But if somebody gave me a glass of wine for breakfast, nothing would happen in the day. I'd be foggy, I'd be fatigued. Action wouldn't happen. It's not just alcohol that can be fermented. You can ferment to produce D-lactate, hydrogen sulfide, ammoniacal compounds, and these are all toxic. They're all poisonous. This presents a huge load to the liver, which then has to detoxify it. So that gives us liver stress. And we are currently seeing epidemics of non-alcoholic liver disease. Fatty liver due to sugars and carbohydrates, not due to alcohol. So the fermenting upper gut is real bad news. Other problems of the fermenting gut is that, we are taught at medical school that, yes, the gut has got bacteria. Of course, in the large bowel, the bacteria those microbes should only be present in the last 3 or 4 or 5 foot of bowel, which we call the colon. And yes, we know that is full of bacteria. But what we're not told is that microbes in the gut, wherever they happen to be, they can get into the bloodstream and get stuck at distal sites. They can get stuck in our joints, in our muscles, in our arteries, and there they will drive inflammation, because the immune system comes along and says, oh, there are some bacteria, there are some yeast here, there are some virus particles here. We better attack them. And that is the basis of autoimmunity. And I'm quite sure that many pathologies, so arthritis, inflammatory arthritis like rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, polymyalgia rheumatica, temporal arthritis, all these conditions are driven by allergy to microbes from the upper fermenting gut. And the starting point to treat that is a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet.
Excellent. Well, that's quite we've got a lot in that answer, haven't we? So gosh, there's a lot to unpack in there. When you talk about the fermenting inappropriately happening in the upper gut and the small intestine, are we talking also causing leaky gut? I mean, there's much talk of leaky gut, obviously, for various of reasons, not least glyphosate and so forth in foods and in the environment due to agriculture. So are we talking leaky gut, allowing these, microbes and all sorts of perhaps bits of protein and goodness knows what getting into the blood? Is that what's happening?
Absolutely, because if you've got microbes in the gut, then they live on the lining of the gut wall, and that creates a low-grade inflammation, and inflammation results in the leaky gut. So yes, the leaky gut then compounds further all these issues.
Gosh. So in a nutshell, diet really is the big important one, isn't it? And of course, we don't hear anything about that in allopathic medicine. So in your practice, I believe you're in rural South Wales somewhere there. Your first thing you're going to be doing then is checking the diet of anyone who comes in with any kind of malady. And I suppose that's the same for all of us who want to take a preventative path, and trying to actually avoid the need to go to the doctor in the first place. Diet, it sounds from what you're saying, is absolutely the first place to start. Absolutely.
And, you don't have to come and see me to change your diet. As I say in all my books, just do it. And it's okay. It's difficult to do in practice because we get used to the diets that we're eating. And the trouble with sugars and carbohydrates is they are so addictive. people don't recognize that they're addictive, but once they appreciate the addictive nature of eating sugars and carbohydrates, then that gives them the intellectual imperative to change their diets.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the obstacles to changing diet is that I've observed, just from watching friends and family and my own experience, is the sort of criteria of eating for taste. Eating for taste will lead you into all sorts of problems, won't it? Whereas if you sort of understand conceptually what it is you're trying to achieve, namely health, and therefore what needs to be consumed, then we need to modify our approach to diet by actually subordinating taste or incorporating it. Obviously, taste is important, but incorporating it, and on occasion subordinating it to the fact that I need to eat these certain things to be healthy.
Well, I think what you're doing now is we're confusing taste and addiction.
Okay.
Because many people don't get their kind of satisfaction from a meal until they've had that sugar hit. That's why, a meal is often followed by something sweet, ice cream or sweet pudding, whatever, in order to get that carbohydrate hit, to get that satisfaction. But once you take the sugar and the carbohydrates and the addiction out of the equation, then we can really enjoy our foods for the tastes and the textures that they have. So, and actually a paleo-ketogenic diet is considerably more varied than a Western diet. In fact, 70% of the calories of Westerners come from 4 foods. It's grains, it's wheat, potato, rice, and sugar. And they are all the addictive foods. And people say, "Oh, I don't feel happy until I've had that big chunk of bread, that pile of chips, whatever." As soon as you get that out of the way, and you're eating for reasons of proper taste and proper texture and proper satisfaction, then taste becomes very important, because taste is how nature guides us to the best foods, how it guides us, because those foods that taste good are good for us. And we learn through experience. So if we are brought up eating a paleo-ketogenic diet, then we learn to love those foods, and love them we do. One food that used to be very popular for hypoallergenic diets is oh gosh, what's it called? It won't come into my name won't come into my head now. But a grain that's used in sago.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever tried sago, but to me it just tastes like well, it tastes awful. It's just like a porridge. It tastes bitter. It tastes like wallpaper paste. So, but people who've been brought up on sago and tapioca, they love it, because that's their staple food, and that's what they've learned to eat and they've learned to love. So, taste is really important to help us discern the healthy foods. Texture is really important. So you have nice crunchy vegetables, nice crunchy salads, lots of herbs and spices, so good for us again, and they've introduced new tastes. So long as you take away the addiction side of things, taste is a totally important facility that we have to find out what the best foods are.
Okay, well, thank you for adding that in, that qualifier. So what is the essence of the paleo diet in terms of fat, carb, protein sort of proportions?
Well, all those foods are important. You have normal amounts of protein. So this is not a high protein diet. And in my book, Paleo-Ketogenic, the Why and the How, I give you a rough idea of how much protein is needed. But for example, just from my diet, I don't eat breakfast because I like to eat all my food within a 6-hour window of time. So lunch will be maybe 2 eggs with paleo bread and salad, and then supper I'll have a small piece of meat, what can sit on part of my hand, so maybe a chop, a small steak, a beef burger or something like that, with lots of vegetables. So it's not a high protein diet, it's normal protein diet. It's high in fiber. You can't eat too much fiber. We know fiber is so good for us because it feeds the friendly microbes in the microbiome, the last part of the bowel. Now, we don't know much about the microbiome, but what we do know is that the more diverse it is, the healthier we are. And my guess is that in the large bowel, there is a predator-prey relationship, just like there is in the rest of the natural world. And microbes in the gut will love a particular food. So one microbe will love and ferment tomato fiber. Another one will maybe love and ferment cucumber fiber. Another will love and ferment another food, cut leaf, parsley, or whatever.
Yeah.
So the more diverse our diet is, then the more diverse the gut is going to be, and the healthier we shall be. And that's another plus point to eating seasonally, because if you'll eat the foods that are in season, which is, guess what, that's what primitive woman did, then we will eat different foods, depending what's there in the garden. So eating seasonally is important, eating as a diverse a diet as you can, and by being paleo-ketogenic, that's an inevitable part of that. So fiber, very important. Carbohydrates, yes, of course, carbohydrates are essential foods. There's no question about that. We need carbohydrates to be broken down in the gut to produce sugar. And sugar is the raw material from which we make ATP, which is the energy molecule, from which we make DNA and RNA, which are nucleotides, without which we can't make protein, protein synthesis. And we also need sugar for detoxification. There's a detox pathway in the liver called the glucuronidation pathway, and that requires sugar. So sugars are essential, but we should be getting them from starches and carbohydrates, pulses and root vegetables, which produce slow release sugar and carbohydrates. And we shouldn't eat so many of those carbohydrates that we overwhelm the ability of the body to deal with them. And we can test for that by measuring ketones.
Okay.
I like people to be in ketosis most of the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned there some time back, I think, that you must be in ketosis at least once a day. So I've heard it said that it's a good idea to cycle in and out of ketosis, which is of course what you're doing in a 24-hour cycle. So what's the benefit of, or rather, let me rephrase that. Let me come at that at a different angle. Is it problematic, or might it be problematic if you were in ketosis for a long period of time, or would that sort of simulate a sort of the hungry gap of winter, if you like, for our ancestors?
Not at all. Being in ketosis all the time is totally desirable. But again, let's see what primitive woman did. Now, for most of the year, she'd have been in ketosis all the time, either because she would be in the winter where there are no sugars and carbohydrates available. She'd been living on her fat reserves, maybe the occasional hunt to knock down the occasional elk or deer or bison or whatever in order to feed herself. But then it's during the autumn where we have a windfall, where we have a free harvest, where the apple trees, the fruit trees ripen, the pulses mature, we have grains, we have nuts, we have seeds. And guess what? They are the high carbohydrate foods. And primitive man had a carbohydrate addiction gene that was turned on through eating carbohydrates. So if a banana came off the tree and she had one banana, oh, that was good, I'll have another, and I'll have another, and I'll have another. So they would eat to excess. And in eating to excess, they would get fat. And of course, fat is massive survival value for the winter. So my view is, let's mimic that. Let's mimic what primitive man did. For me, that's, yes, in the autumn here, I'm a gardener and we have potatoes and parsnips and carrots and veg. And okay, I may be knocked out of ketosis occasionally. And I don't overeat those things because I don't want to get fat. But I don't have to get fat, because us Westerners, we have food security, don't we? So we have, the supermarkets don't close in the winter, so we can survive. So the occasional carbohydrate slipping out of ketosis is no problem at all, and maybe even desirable. But I know that I'm an addict. I know I could happily get addicted to sugar. I just about have the discipline to say no to the first square of chocolate. But if I have the first square of chocolate, then the whole bar's going to go, because, that's my problem. So,
me too.
Voila, welcome to the human race. So I don't have that first square. I do occasionally, and if a bar of chocolate comes into the household, then I have a square, and I make sure the rest of the tribe have some too. Otherwise, I'm going to scoff the whole lot. So, we have ways of dealing with that. But addiction, Patrick Holford points out, we all die from a combination of addiction and ignorance. And addiction, and yes, sugars and carbs are the most pernicious, but to alcohol, to nicotine, to caffeine, all those things, we know that drives modern pathologies. But it's just that the sugar addiction is not generally recognized. It's not generally accepted as such. But believe you me, it's very real.
Yes. And I suppose when we're talking about sugars, we have to remind ourselves that, of course, grains are sugars, aren't they, when they're digested, even potatoes and rice, actually. Often that's missed by perhaps the average person, but all of these things can spike our blood sugar, can't they? A slice of toast and jam is sort of a double helping of sugar, isn't it?
Correct, because that's fast release sugar and then slow release sugar. And what's so interesting about the sugar thing is it's not the total amount of carbohydrate that you eat that gives you the hormonal changes, the insulin spike and the adrenaline spike. It's the rate of change of sugar in the bloodstream. So if you have, say, fruit juice or pure sugar that you consume, then the blood sugar goes up very quickly. And if the blood sugar goes up very quickly, then there's a large insulin spike in response to that. Yeah. But by contrast, if we have a slow release carbohydrate like pulses or potatoes those sort of foods or whole grains, then the blood sugar comes up much more slowly, and therefore you get much less of an insulin spike. And in parallel with that, it's so important to eat slowly and not gobble your food. People who are gobblers, who stuff it back quickly, that's because they're looking for that spike, because that's the addictive spike that gives them the hit.
Yeah.
This is why people love smoking nicotine, because if you inhale nicotine, it's in the lungs and seconds later it's in the brain. I.e., the blood levels of nicotine come up very quickly, and that's what gives you the hit. This is why heroin addicts inject it intravenously, because they get the hit. So when you do eat your carbohydrates or you have your meal, sit down with a group of people, have a chat, have a giggle, chew a bit, put your foot down, sit back, have a little chat, and then eat a little bit more. Eating slowly slows the rate at which the blood sugar changes, and that's hugely beneficial as well.
Right. A little harder to do that when you have the occasional bar of chocolate, like I do at the weekend. I tend to sort of be ketogenic throughout the week and have next to little sugar really, but it's the pendulum swings back the other way at the weekend when
That is absolutely fine. I'm very happy for you to do that, Nigel. But real addicts, sugar addicts like me, can't get off them. So if I have it, then I want more and more and more. So so long as you can get back on the keto wagon, then what you're saying is absolutely fine. I have no problem with that. Again, if you're exercising, you will burn off the sugar very quickly. And this is why exercise is so important for blood sugar control, especially with diabetics, because that burns off the sugar and gets rid of it, because sugar in the blood is so dangerous and so damaging.
So coming back to the grains then, do you think that grains should actually be avoided? I've heard you speak elsewhere actually, talking about the undesirability of grains. Where do they fit? Tell us about grains. How much should you be consuming?
Okay, well, wheat is probably the most toxic and difficult grain for many reasons. Yes, it's high in carbohydrates. Wheat protein, gluten is a major allergen. It's very common to see a wheat allergy. And the second thing is it's quite high in lectins, which are plant antibiotics effectively. And for some people, they just don't tolerate the lectins. And I went to a conference recently, and it was the consensus of the meeting that we humans probably should not be eating wheat products or not the modern wheats that are being produced by modern agriculture, because they are so toxic. But, again, if somebody offered me, and I'm not allergic to wheat, thankfully, a nice slice of rye bread with some, paleo butter on it, whatever, then of course I would eat that. I would eat it slowly. I would chew it well. And the odd slice of that is not going to knock me out of ketosis. And I know that because I measure using a ketone breath test, and I know I'm in ketosis 99% of the time.
Okay.
So everybody's very individual. Now, men have a higher metabolic rate than women. They're running about 15 or 20% higher. So men can get away with more carbohydrates than women can, for example. And because I'm seeing patients with fatigue syndromes, they cannot exercise. So they can't use exercise to burn off their sugars. So they have to be even more disciplined with respect to the diet. But and young people can get away with blue murder. Young people can get away with much more than we can. But as you get older, and guess what I'm doing now? I'm getting older. You have to work harder in order to maintain the status quo. And I think it's worth it, because I want my brain to be sharp. I want to have the energy to do all the things that I love doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you say measuring ketosis with a breath test, can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I know that some of my listeners, and certainly I am more familiar with the ketone meters that are you know, a blood test. So how does that work, and is it reliable? Maybe you could furnish us with some link to that sort of thing.
Well, the keto, you're absolutely right. Measuring ketones in the bloodstream is undoubtedly the best way to assure you're in ketosis. But the sticks that you use are quite expensive. They cost £1 each. You have to prick your finger to do it. And guess what? I'm a wimp. I don't like doing it. So this is why I prefer the ketone breath meters. Now, the best one of all, undoubtedly, is this one here called Ace Track. But it's rather expensive. It's 200 quid's worth of gear. But that is by far and away the most accurate and the best. There are others, like this is one ketone breath meter. This is another one. They're just called ketone meters, which are pretty good.
Okay.
Not as accurate, but you don't have to have absolute accuracy, because so long as you're in ketosis once a day, that's good enough for me.
Okay.
Or it's good enough to get started. And the reason for this is we do have a wonderful mechanism for mopping up excess sugars that come through from the gut. It's called glycogen. And I think of glycogen as a sponge. So we have glycogen in the liver and we have glycogen in the muscles. And normally the glycogen sponge should be squeezed dry. Now, because sugar is so toxic, if there's any sugar, excess glycogen or excess sugar in the system, the body always burns that first. And then it goes into fat burning mode. So if you have got any ketones at all in your breath, then that tells you the glycogen sponge is squeezed dry, there's no excess sugar there, and you're in fat burning. Okay. Now, the glycogen sponge can deal with quite a lot of sugars from the gut. It'll mop up maybe up to 1,700 calories, has been suggested, can be contained in the glycogen sponge. So as you get that tsunami of sugars pouring through from the gut following a meal or your bar of chocolate or whatever, all the venous drainage of the gut goes into the portal vein, which goes from the gut direct to the liver. And the liver sorts out that mess. It sorts out the toxic soup of stuff that's coming through from the gut. And it deals with sugar by sucking it up into the glycogen sponge. Now, if that glycogen sponge is saturated from a meal before that you've eaten or because you haven't exercised or whatever, then there's nowhere for the sugar to go. And therefore it spills over into the bloodstream, you spike insulin and you produce fat from that. And that's what drives non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because the insulin dumps the fat in the liver. It also dumps the fat in our body. So people who can't lose weight or who have got a high BMI, they are likely to have high levels of insulin, which is driving that. And of course, we know that's the forerunner to diabetes.
Yeah.
So, have a ketone breath meter. These are about 40 quid. This Ace Track, which is the best I say, is about 200 quid. But so long as you're in ketosis once a day, I'm a happy bunny.
Okay, so obviously sugar intake is important for getting into ketosis. What other
sugar intake? No.
Sorry. Avoiding sugar intake. I beg your pardon. Getting things upside down. What are the other key dietary considerations that we should avoid if we say obviously we need to limit sugar or at least eat it carefully? What other considerations do we need to think about?
Well, the big one that people get muddled up over is fruit, because fruit is a bag of sugar. Yes. And the sugar in fruit is particularly pernicious. It's called fructose. And fructose stops your glycogen sponge from squeezing empty. So the people who drink, half a pint of orange juice for breakfast because they think it's healthy, that's the worst possible start to the day. Fruit juice are particularly pernicious, as I say. The sugar from berries, like strawberries, raspberries, blackcurrants, I find I can eat those foods fine and I remain in ketosis, no problem at all. So there's hardly any fructose in those foods. But the thing is, everybody is different. That's the joy of measuring, because, as I say to all my patients, I can give you the rules of the game and the tools of the trade, and then you have to fine tune what you can and you cannot get away with, and you judge that by testing. So I love the game of cricket, and again, cricket is played by the rules of the game. Everybody has the same rules, everybody has the same tools, but they all play it differently, don't they? And you can recognise the bowlers from their action and their way they run in and how the ball moves. Ditto the batters. So we are all very different. And it's not my job to micromanage my patients, say, oh, let's try a little bit of this for breakfast and a little bit of that for lunch and blah, 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 because I haven't got time to. My job is to doctor, and docere comes from the Latin to teach, is to teach my patients, to teach people to do it themselves. And I now know that the starting point to treat absolutely everything is this basic package of treatment, which starts off with a keto diet. And people can do it themselves. They don't have to go to an expensive doctor or spend a fortune on a nutritional therapist. As I say in all my books, just do it.
Yeah. So what about dairy then? Because I know that the paleo sort of idea excludes dairy because dairy is a relatively new innovation in human diet from farming and animal husbandry, obviously. So what is the problem, if you like, with dairy, aside from perhaps, is it A2 casein allergies and so forth? Tell us about that.
Several. Now, of course, dairy products, human milk for the young baby is the perfect food. And we need that for the baby to grow quickly, to make strong bones, tissues, dee-da. But beyond weaning, there is no other mammal that consumes dairy products. Quite right too, many reasons. The first reason is the milk protein. Now, milk protein is growth promoting. That's why we give it to babies, so they grow quickly. So and all mammals have to grow quickly, or most mammals have to grow quickly in order to escape predators. And having high milk protein is a risk factor for cancer. Wonderful book written by Jane Plant, Your Life in Your Hands. She was a geography lecturer at Nottingham, and she herself had breast cancer. She had the lump removed, she had the chemotherapy, she had the radiotherapy, and was told 2 months to live. She started to do some research. She started to take control of her diet and to discover that in China, people eating traditional Chinese diets, no breast cancer. Chinese people, no dairy products. And she just cut out the dairy products and she watched that tumor shrink away to almost nothing. She also demonstrated that dairy products are implicated in prostate cancer because they are growth promoting. So no milk protein in order to avoid prostate and breast cancer. Secondly is the milk sugar. Milk is high in sugar, and that gets fermented in the upper gut. And we've talked about the problems of the fermenting of the upper fermenting gut. The third problem is that they have a very high proportion of calcium to magnesium. So our actual needs are calcium to magnesium in the proportion 1 part calcium to 1 part magnesium. That's desirable. In dairy products, it's 10 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium. Now, calcium and magnesium are absorbed by a similar mechanism. They compete with each other for absorption. So taking lots of dairy products is going to induce a magnesium deficiency, and that is a major risk factor for heart disease. It's also a major risk factor for osteoporosis. So these and those two things aside, dairy products are a major allergen. And the interesting thing about dairy allergy is it runs very strongly in families. So if you've got a first degree relative with dairy allergy, then it's likely that others have it too. And the other interesting thing about dairy is the allergen remains the same throughout life, but the different manifestations of that change. So the babies start off life with pyloric stenosis or 3-month colic. So they have terrible colic as babies. Then they grow out of that at 13 weeks, and then they get toddler diarrhea. And then they grow out of that and they get catarrhal conditions with glue ear, blocked ears, snotty catarrhal noses. Then they grow out of that, maybe get recurrent tonsillitis, and then later on migraine, arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, or whatever. So if somebody has that progression of getting one disease and then growing one symptom, then growing out of it, and then getting another symptom and growing out of it, and so on, they're probably allergic, and dairy product would come at the top of my list of suspects. Okay. So dairy is generally no.
Yes, I mean the A2, A1 casein protein. I mean, a lot of people are have a problem with that. I've heard that can cause problems, but it's interesting to hear those other things as well. With the magnesium thing, can you not balance your magnesium, calcium by eating other high magnesium rich foods?
You just cannot get enough on board. We're talking about 10 to 1. So you'd have to eat, vast amounts of green leafy vegetables and vast amount of magnesium that might even cause diarrhea as a result. So it's the old story. The occasional bit is fine. So the safest dairy product is butter. Now, unfortunately, I'm that allergic, I don't tolerate butter. But if you're absolutely sure you're not dairy allergic, then butter is fine.
Okay. Could ghee be an alternative, which is more rarefied form of butter? Is that
ghee? Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ghee is even better than butter, because ghee is melted butter. The protein comes to the top, so you skim off the white protein and you're left with beautiful, pure yellow fat. Absolutely perfect.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to raise is the vegetarian carnivore question. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure to be vegetarian these days, it seems, in the mainstream narrative, not least to allegedly save the planet. But what do you think? What about this meat? How important is meat? Can you get everything from vegetables? Can you get everything from meat? What's your view on that?
Well, humans evolved as omnivores, having a bit of meat and lots of vegetables. It is perfectly possible to be vegetarian and dairy-free. I always want my vegetarians to be consuming eggs, because eggs are a fabulous food, and got all the proteins in them, lots of lovely fats. So vegetarian is absolutely fine. Happy for people to be vegetarian, but many vegetarians rely on processed foods, and shamefully 70% of our calories in the modern world come from processed foods. So processed foods, get the thumbs down because for all sorts of reasons. So they're a problem. And the other thing is, often vegetarian foods are high in carbohydrates. They tend to have a lot of meats and pulses and so on. So it's the old story. Yes, you can be paleo-ketogenic and you can be vegetarian, but it's hard work. Again, I do have many patients vegetarian, but do test to see. Carnivore diets, carnivore diets can be very healthy. And of course, the Indians eat nothing but a carnivore diet. If I have somebody who has multiple food allergies and you're trying to work out, which food is safe or otherwise, often a carnivore diet is a great start, because it gives the gut a chance to rest, to heal and repair.
I've heard it referred to as a cleansing diet, going carnivore for a period. Is that why?
Absolutely is. So there's nothing wrong with the carnivore diet. It's perfectly healthy. Funny enough, I was just talking to a very dear friend came and stayed the weekend. She's a consultant psychiatrist working in Edinburgh. Her name is Rachel Brown, and she's been eating pure carnivore for 4 years. And that, if she can persuade her patients to do it, that is the starting point to treat all psychiatric disease, because so many psychiatric conditions are driven by addiction. Having a psychiatric disease like schizophrenia, like manic depression, like chronic anxiety, like depression is very stressful, and people control their stress with addiction. With sugars, of course, we call it comfort eating, don't we? Yeah. And when I used to work in Nottinghamshire, it was a chick butty. In Scotland, it's a sugar sandwich or a deep fried Mars bar. We all know what those comfort foods are. But you can't have an upper without a downer. It's the old story. But the psychiatric patients, they are particularly stressed, and they go for addiction in spades. And even when I was working as a medical student in the 1970s doing a psychiatric rotation, I was aware that the people there were controlling their symptoms with biscuits, with cigarettes, with caffeine. Very often if they're in inpatient units, they weren't allowed alcohol or other such. So, and just doing a meat-based diet without the addiction is a very good way of getting off sugars and carbohydrates. And incidentally, on that note, what many psychiatrists do is they just replace one addiction with another. They use minor tranquilizers, they use major tranquilizers, they use antidepressants, and these are all addictive drugs. So that patient stress is controlled, but they're rendered emotionally numb. On those drugs for years, they lose their personalities. This is not the way forward. We have to go back to root causes, and that always starts with the diet.
Excellent. So what about detoxification then? Because I imagine, if we've got allergies and so forth, or just in general, obviously we live in a very toxic world these days. There are many things, furniture and carpets and paint sprays and endless products have got toxins in them, which are harmful to and accumulate in the human body. So what's your approach to detox, and what do you advocate to achieve detoxification?
Well, we have to do these things in order. We have to start off with the biggest toxic load and then work down from that. And the biggest toxic load that comes from our body are products of the upper fermenting gut. And the energy that we need to deal with those products and to deal with sugar is extremely high. And on that note, when we burn sugar in our mitochondria, in our engines, to generate energy, we produce a lot of free radicals, molecules with an unpaired electron, and that has to be dealt with by our antioxidant system. So free radicals are another sort of toxin. But if we're running on ketones, then the production of free radicals is minimized. So our biochemistry is much freer from friction when we're running on ketones as opposed to running on sugars. So the most important thing is a ketogenic diet and sort out the upper fermenting gut.
Okay, so it's like a sort of a clean burning fuel, if you like, fats.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. That absolutely nails it. And then we have to look at other toxins, and most of them come from our home, from cleaning chemicals, from perfumes, from disinfectants, from bleaches, from things that were from fire retardants in furniture, things that we're using in the home. And we just have to learn, what those are and avoid them. So we get rid of the new furniture, the carpets that smell. The key is if you can smell something, it can be causing problems. Even if you can't smell things, it can be causing problems. The obvious one is carbon monoxide, of course, but the nose is a very good clue.
Right.
And we can get rid of those toxins with heating regimes. And I've now seen over 30 patients where I've done fat biopsies before and after. The reason it stops at 30 is because I know these regimes work, and I'm not going to do expensive tests on patients without good reason. But the heating regimes work really well. So what do I mean by heating regimes? Well, the one I prefer to use more than anything else are Epsom salt baths. Now, most people have got a bath. Epsom salts are very inexpensive. You can get them from epsomsalts.co.uk for about 35 quid for a 20 kilogram bag, and that is sufficient for 40 baths. So the recipe is half a kilogram of Epsom salts in the bath. Now, the heat from the bath warms up the toxins which are in our fat, in our subcutaneous fat, boils them off effectively into the fatty layer on the surface of our skin, and then we're in the bath, we wash that off with soap and water. And then, of course, being with magnesium is absorbed through the skin. Sulfate is absorbed through the skin, and we know this from work by Rosemary Waring at Birmingham. So we're getting a nice dose of magnesium and a nice dose of sulfate. And sulfate also helps us to detox.
Okay.
But just, going for a run, sweating and getting hot, and showering off afterwards will also detox us. Of course, that's not an option for my chronic fatigue syndrome patients, but most people are normally healthy, have a walk every day, and hopefully they get hot, hopefully they sweat, and then they shower off afterwards, and that helps to detoxify. Sunbathing, far infrared saunas, traditional sauning, all these will help to get rid of the pesticide burden and the volatile organics burden as well.
Right.
Now, but those heating regimes, they won't get rid of heavy metals. And that's the other major source of toxins from the outside world. And heavy metals come into us through dental amalgam, through lead in our water, through cadmium from cigarette smoke, from aluminium from deodorants, aluminium from aluminium cans, aluminium from vaccines. And they won't come out with the heating regimes. But we can get rid of them with vitamin C, with iodine, and also chelating agents. We use chelating agents. The one I'm using at the moment is detoxamine, which is EDTA. Anybody can access it. It's used by suppository, so you put it into the tail end last thing at night, and that pulls out the heavy metals. So lots of ways of achieving that. Yeah.
For the chelating things, would you think something like zeolite? I've heard people talking about zeolite as something that you can...
Correct. Yeah. Zeolite does a very good job. But remember, zeolite also pulls out the friendly minerals as well. So zeolite is great, but don't use it all the time. Use it for a window of time, and then make sure you're taking lots of extra minerals in order to compensate for those friendly minerals that the zeolite also pulls out.
Okay.
And I do a particular product which I call sunshine salt, which is just 80% sea salt. And then it's got all the minerals, it's got all the calcium, magnesium, potassium, zinc, copper, selenium, chromium, boron that you need in a soluble form, in the correct proportion, and it's very cheap.
Okay.
That's what I like for my patients.
What about things like colonic irrigation? And, I've heard it said that the lower intestine, that last 3 or 4 feet of our intestinal system, the colon is quite a significant sort of detox tool. It can be where toxins are sort of dumped overboard, if you like. Is there much truth in that? And if so, is there any merit in a colonic, which is essentially a sort of a water wash for the colon?
Well, there's certainly lots of anecdotal evidence that often people feel much better after a colonic. But my view is that this can be achieved by eating a high fiber diet and having a normal gut transit time. Now, food should spend about an hour to 90 minutes in the stomach, about 4 hours in the small intestine, and anything 24 hours maybe in the large intestine. Now, if you've got a long gut transit time, and it's easy to estimate, if you eat some sweet corn, see how long it takes to appear at the other end. Eat some beetroot, see how long it takes to appear at the other end. That's a very easy way of measuring gut transit time. If it's much more than 36 hours, then you have slow gut transit time. And a common cause of that is insufficient fiber in the diet. So again, a paleo-ketogenic diet is going to be high in fiber. One of my favorite recipes is for linseed bread, which is 2% carb, 26% fiber. It's got lots of fiber in it, but lots of plant-based foods, lots of green vegetables, pulses, salad is going to ensure plenty of fiber to the gut, so we have a short gut transit time, and that is as good as colonics. So and there's no harm in colonics, but it's short-term gain and doesn't really address the root cause of.
Okay, so fiber and short transit time, you're saying is the
normal gut transit time, 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned iodine in there with reference to detox. Can you tell us about iodine, and is that an important component? And maybe we can perhaps bridge into supplementation because I imagine iodine isn't something that's particularly prominent in people's diets.
And that's correct. And guess what? The whole population is iodine deficiency. We may have enough to prevent, the obvious symptoms of iodine deficiency like goiter, but we do not have enough for iodine sufficiency, i.e. for optimal health. Now, iodine is one of my favorite multitasking tools. What I'm looking for my patients and for anybody are good tools that everybody can access, that are intrinsically safe, that do lots of good things and have minimal potential, zero potential to harm us. And iodine is one such. Now, as I mentioned, as we start off, the starting point is the paleo-ketogenic diet because of the upper fermenting gut. Now, the way we can further help the upper fermenting gut is using vitamin C and iodine, because both vitamin C and iodine contact kill all microbes. So I like 5 grams of vitamin C in the morning, and then iodine, I like to use Lugol's iodine, 15%, 3 drops at night. Again, it's very cheap and it does many good things. It contact kills 5 microbes in the upper fermenting gut to get rid of things like Helicobacter pylori, candida problems, maybe parasites as well. It also, as we mentioned, strips out the heavy metals. But iodine is essential for skeletal muscles. Without iodine, we don't have strong muscles. It's an essential part of defense against infection because our mucous membranes, iodine is concentrated in the mucous membranes of the nose and the respiratory tract. And therefore, when we inhale viruses, the first thing they meet is iodine, and that helps to kill them. So it protects us from infection. It's essential for our brain. Iodine deficiency across the world is the commonest cause of low IQ and mental insufficiency. So, iodine is just vitally important. And
gosh, it sounds it. It begs the question. You've mentioned obviously Lugol's iodine, and that's something that obviously people can source and supplement with. It begs the question to me: what foods does contain iodine that we're not eating, or is it depleted in those foods?
Seafood. So much so that, of course, Japan, they have a high proportion of seafood in their diet, and their average intake of iodine is about 15 milligrams a day. Now, that is miles ahead of the risible, the laughable 150 micrograms that are recommended. So they're already eating 100 times more iodine than is recommended in Western societies. And guess what? The Japanese are a very fit race. They have more centenarians than any other race, low incidence of cancer. And I'm quite sure that iodine is part of that.
Yeah. So if one were to eat lots of fish, for example, would you then not really need to worry about supplementing with iodine? You know, I mean, well, you hear some people saying that it's better to get your nutrients from real food as opposed to vitamins, and I suppose, you know, it sounds like there's some wisdom in that. What do you think on that issue, and specifically seafood and iodine?
Well, the answer is perhaps, but the problem with seafood is it's all toxic. Seafood is toxic in mercury and it's toxic in organochlorines because we are polluting our oceans so badly. So one of my favorite recommendations I like people to do is have fish oils, but you have to make sure that fish oil has been filtered through activated charcoal. Otherwise, you're going to give yourself a toxic dose of heavy metals and organochlorine pesticides. So again, seafood is good, but it is also toxic. So, and if you ate sufficient seafood for iodine sufficiency, you would also be poisoning yourself with organochlorines and probably heavy metals as well. So, yeah, seafood is lovely stuff, but, you know, I say, well, probably once a week, maybe twice a week max. I mean, the most toxic food you can eat is salmon that's been produced in Scotland, because they are produced intensively in cages, and they are particularly subject to fish lice. As soon as you put any animal in an intensive condition, you're going to get parasites moving in, aren't you? You know, so obvious. And salmon in Scotland suffered from fish lice. And the worst poison patients I saw was with organophosphate poisoning was a guy who was working in the fish cages, because they just spray organophosphates into the water immediately around these fish. And okay, it kills the fish lice, but it half kills the fish as well. So, seafood, salmon from Scotland, you know, sadly is contaminated. Having said which, the last time I went up to Scotland to see my sister who's up there, she said they are developing new techniques where they're spraying, they're making the fish run through a fish race and spraying them with high pressure water to wash the fish lice off. So maybe it's not as bad as it was, but be careful with seafoods generally.
Okay, I'm aware of time now, so maybe are there any other things that you think it might be important for people to supplement with, given the sort of scarcity of nutrients and soil depletions going on with modern farming? What do you think are these sort of, you know, top 3 or 4 supplements people should consider taking?
Okay, well, my view is we all need a good multivitamin, just as an insurance policy. We certainly need the minerals, and I like my sunshine salt because it's got all the minerals in the right proportion and a form that's soluble.
Sorry, what's sunshine salt? Sunshine salt,
that's a mixture I have made up for my patients. It's 80% sea salt and it's 20% all the minerals, all the not all the magnesium, calcium, potassium, but a good dollop of those, but all the zinc, copper, selenium, manganese, boron, molybdenum, that we need for root health. And then some oils. I like to use hemp oil, and that goes in on my French dressing and on my. You don't cook with oils, of course. Fish oil is very important. Patrick Holden, you know, if you want to avoid Alzheimer's disease, which is completely avoidable, the 3 important things are low carbohydrate diet, fish oils, and then check your homocysteine, which is a measure of your B vitamin status. Okay. So a multivitamin, sunshine salt, vitamin C 5 grams a day, vitamin D 10,000 IU daily, and iodine 3 drops of Lugol's last thing at night.
Okay, gosh, well, that gives everybody a very good head start. And I must add that your website is extremely comprehensive. There's absolutely loads on there. You know, you could spend many days gleaning wisdom from there. So I'll have the link below the video and, of course, in the show notes for the podcast. And I thoroughly recommend people have a good look through there. There is absolutely so much information. And, of course, it leads to some of your products, which you mentioned the sunshine salt there, didn't you? So any sort of closing conclusions for the would-be paleo-ketogenic
sort of the person, I guess the audience here is preventative, really. We're looking how to be healthy, preventative, obviously, and treating things as well. And if anybody is in the vicinity of South Wales, of course, they can come and contact you. But any closing sort of words for the would-be paleo-ketogenic
okay
eater?
Well, the obvious one is just do it, and it's not as difficult as it's not as difficult as you think. One thing I do is I run weekends here at my house, and people come on a Thursday night and I talk medicine all day, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And of course we eat a paleo-ketogenic diet, and the majority of them are in ketosis by Sunday. So it's not difficult, and we eat extremely well. We love our food, and nobody, well, perhaps they're too polite, but they don't get awful symptoms as a result of going into it. So it's very doable, and please just do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. There's been so much information, a very information-dense conversation, dare I say. So thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom. And I do strongly suggest that people visit your website and indeed consider this whole paleo-ketogenic approach. It sounds marvelous. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure.
And thank you all very much for listening. I do hope you've got something from this, and do remember to visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more there, and that's where you'll find the show notes to this podcast, of course. And above all, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to you joining me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.